In the frozen heart of Utah's snow pine mountains, a routine wildlife patrol turned into something no one could explain. A black Mustang stood motionless in the storm, shielding his wounded brother from the howling wind, refusing to leave. What unfolded next would challenge everything we thought we knew about wild horses, loyalty, and the incredible power of choosing love over freedom. The winter wind roared down the canyons of Snow Pine, Utah, like a freight train barreling through silence. It kicked up flurries of snow that danced against the jagged rock walls and twisted through the towering pines. From above, the land looked like a forgotten wilderness, untouched, merciless, and blanketed in white. In the cockpit of a bright orange Bell 429 helicopter, Ellie Tanner squinted through the frost-lined windshield. Her hands, steady as stone, guided the aircraft in a slow sweep over the ridge. She'd flown search patterns like this 100 times for the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. But something today felt different. Ellie, 36, ex-military pilot with a face carved by wind and sun, wasn't the type to spook easy. She wore a patched bomber jacket that still bore the faded insignia from her time-flying medevac in Kandahar, and a black braided cord around her neck that once belonged to her childhood horse, Clover, who had died the week before her high school graduation. She rarely talked about that. "Eagle 1 to Bass, come in," she said, her voice crackling through the radio. "Copy, Eagle 1. What do you see up there?" came the reply from the base. Ellie angled the chopper lower over a sharp drop in the terrain. The canyon was narrow here, Dead Briar Hollow, as the locals called it. Few dared hike into its cliffs once winter set in. But what caught her eye wasn't the terrain. "There are 2 horses in the canyon," she said. "One's down, the other's just standing over it, not moving. Been circling 10 minutes, and it hasn't budged." A pause, then, "Say again?" "I said one horse is lying on its side, looks injured. The other is standing between it and the edge of the cliff like it's guarding it." At the Wildlife Response Center 20 miles away, Dr. Reese Callahan set her coffee down so hard the cup cracked. She didn't hesitate. "Get me the footage," she snapped. "Now." Reese was 44, tall, deliberate, and still carried the clipped tone of a university professor. She had once lectured on animal cognition at Oregon State, but a decade ago she'd traded the podium for muddy boots and horse trailers. These days, she was the state's lead veterinarian for wild equine response, known for her no-nonsense attitude and uncanny intuition when it came to animal behavior. As the photos came through grainy at first, then clearer. Reese's brows furrowed. The horse on the ground was a bay stallion, legs tucked unnaturally, breath shallow. The other was larger, black as midnight, flanks tense, standing dead still. "Zoom in," Reese murmured. The image sharpened. The black stallion was positioned in a perfect angle, shielding the injured horse's flank from the wind. Snow had piled against his back. His ears were forward, his body trembling not from fear, but strain. "He's not just staying," Reese whispered. "He's protecting." She turned to the radio. "Ellie, document everything. I'm activating rescue protocol. Tell the boys to load up rappelling gear, veterinary kits, trauma bags. We're going in." "Copy that," Ellie replied. "Better hurry. Weather's turning mean." Less than an hour later, the base camp buzzed with activity. The temperature had dropped to 14 degrees, and the first signs of a storm were curling over the western horizon. Reese climbed into the command rig and reviewed the feed again. She had seen plenty of injured animals over the years, and plenty of companion behavior to mates, siblings, even former rivals, staying close to the dying. But this was something else. The black stallion hadn't moved from his post. He didn't pace or whinny. He didn't flee when the chopper passed overhead. He simply stood his ground, muscles flexed, eyes fixed on the downed horse beside him. Almost like a soldier, Reese muttered. She keyed her radio again. Ellie, I'm naming the bay copper. That leg's either broken or dislocated. The other one, the black, call him Midnight. Because that look in his eyes? That's not wild. That's something else entirely. On the ridge, Ellie gave a rare half-smile. Understood. Midnight and copper it is. Back in the air, Ellie circled one more time, careful not to spook the animals. The blades whipped snow across the ledge where the two horses stood, 15 feet above the canyon floor, with a sheer drop just behind them. Midnight shifted only slightly, angling his body wider to take the brunt of the snow. He's sheltering him, Ellie murmured, like a wall. Reese stared at the transmission screen, arms crossed tight. We'll need to rappel down to that ledge, she told her team, and do it fast, before that storm closes in. She turned to the newest member of the crew, 28-year-old mountain specialist Lucas Mendez, and pointed to the canyon map. This is our entry, she said. Straight descent. I'll go first. Lucas blinked. You sure, Doc? That's a serious pitch. I'm not sending anyone down there unless I go first, she replied flatly. She grabbed her coat and helmet. And someone prep the meds. If Copper's in shock, we'll have to stabilize him before we even think about an airlift. As the sun began to sink below the snow-streaked ridges, casting long shadows across Dead Briar Hollow, the rescue team gathered at the cliff's edge. Far below, Midnight stood like a sentinel, silent, unflinching. Copper lay curled beside him, flanks barely rising. Reese stared down, her heart thudding. You ready for this? Lucas asked, checking her harness. No, she said quietly, but we don't have a choice. She looked down one more time at the black horse guarding the other. If we don't move now, we'll lose them both. And with that, the wind rose again, howling down through the canyon like a warning. Reese gripped the rope, leaned into the void, and began her descent into the silence below. The snow had deepened by the time Dr. Reese Callahan's boots hit the frozen ledge. Her breath came out in white clouds. The canyon walls rose like jagged jaws around her, swallowing sound. The only things she could hear were the distant chopper blades overhead and the steady crunch of climbing ropes above her. Lucas Mendez was following close behind, slow and deliberate, guiding the supply bag down. But all of Reese's focus was on the two stallions not 20 feet ahead. Midnight didn't move. He hadn't moved in hours. The black stallion stood between her and Copper, his injured brother, like a gate that no force of nature would breach. Snow crusted his mane. His flanks heaved from the cold, from fatigue, but his eyes were sharp and fixed on her. Lucas reached the ledge behind her. You seeing this up close, Doc? He whispered. That's not just watchfulness. That's intention. Reese nodded slowly, unclipping her harness. He's not wild in the way we think. He's not reacting. He's calculating. He's reading every move we make. The wind kicked again, sweeping snow into their faces. Reese lowered her gaze, not wanting to challenge Midnight directly. She moved slowly, deliberately, lowering herself to her knees. She unzipped her pack and pulled out a small thermal blanket, making sure every motion was smooth and non-threatening. Then she spoke, not loudly, but with quiet conviction. We're not here to hurt him, Midnight. We're not here to take anything from you. The stallion's ears flicked forward, then pinned back again. His head dropped slightly, not aggressive, but alert. Reese reached into her side pouch and pulled out a soft, fleece-lined wrap, soaked in antiseptic. She held it up gently. This is for Copper, she said. We can't leave him like this. Lucas shifted. Midnight's eyes tracked him instantly. Don't move too quick, Reese muttered. He'll see it as a threat. Lucas nodded and stood still, even as snow started to collect on his shoulders. Reese looked back at the stallion and tried again, voice softer this time. I know you don't trust us. But I think you love that horse lying behind you more than you're afraid of us, so let us help. Midnight didn't back down, but then he moved, just barely, just enough to shift one hoof to the right. His massive body stayed between them and Copper, but now Reese could see the edge of the bay stallion's face, eyes closed, breathing labored. "I'll take it," she whispered. "That's consent." She motioned to Lucas to stay put and crawled a few inches forward. The snow crackled under her knees, her breath steamed as she leaned forward and finally laid a hand on Copper's neck. The stallion stirred weakly but didn't flinch. Reese ran her fingers down the shoulder joint, then lower until she reached the leg. The angle was all wrong. She felt it in the bone fractured, maybe worse. She turned her head to Midnight. "We have to splint him. You get that, don't you?" Midnight didn't react. He just stayed rooted like a tree against the wind. Lucas inched closer, holding the veterinary med pack. "Doc, I got the thermal wraps and the emergency IV kit." "Slow," she said without turning. But even as Lucas approached, Midnight's ears went flat again. His tail lashed. Reese raised a hand. "Lucas, stop." They were back to the edge. Reese turned back to the stallion and, without breaking eye contact, whispered, "We're trying to save him. That's what you've been doing all this time, isn't it? Standing out here, taking the wind, the cold, keeping the predators away." She swallowed. "But now, it's our turn." Then something extraordinary happened. Midnight still watching, Reese lowered his head toward Copper. He reached out and gently nuzzled his brother's forehead. A soft, low whicker vibrated from his chest, barely audible over the wind. Then slowly he stepped aside. Only one step, but enough. Lucas exhaled. "I think that's as much invitation as we're gonna get." They moved fast, but gentle. Reese splinted the broken leg with a stabilizing frame, using compression wraps and a fiberglass brace. Copper whimpered softly once, but Midnight was instantly beside him again, nuzzling the base of his mane. Reese watched in awe. "He's not just comforting him," she murmured. "He's sinking to his pain, reacting to it." Lucas frowned. "That's not instinct." "No," she said, "it's devotion." They set up a portable heater to warm Copper's core body temperature. Reese started a saline IV and injected a mild sedative to keep the stallion calm. All the while, Midnight watched every movement. "You see how he stands between Copper and the ledge?" Lucas whispered. "Always facing out," Reese added. "He's creating a buffer. He knows the most vulnerable angle." Lucas shook his head. "That's battlefield tactics. That's—" He didn't finish. Reese's radio crackled. It was Ellie. "Storm's rolling in fast. We've got maybe 90 minutes. Tops." Reese stood slowly and looked down at the horses. "We're not just rescuing one horse here," she said. "We're dealing with a pair, a bonded pair." Lucas zipped up the med kit. "You think they're brothers?" Reese stared at the two stallions, almost identical in size, except one bay, one black. Same jawline, same white star on the left shoulder. Copper's smaller, more worn, but unmistakably blood. "I don't just think it," she said. "I feel it." Midnight turned his head then, just slightly, and locked eyes with her. It wasn't a challenge. It was trust. Cautious. Earned, but trust. Reese stepped back. "We've done what we can for now. Next step is getting them both out alive." She turned to Lucas. "Prep for aerial extraction, but tell the others, this is no ordinary lift. If we try to take one without the other, we'll lose them both." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "You're saying we lift two wild stallions at once?" "I'm saying," Reese replied, "Midnight has made his decision. He's not leaving without his brother." The wind changed. Reese felt it in her bones even before the sky did. It swept through the canyon like a warning, colder than before, sharper. The kind of wind that didn't just bring snow, it brought decisions. Above, the clouds thickened, heavy with the weight of something impatient. The sky had turned the color of bruised steel. What had been flakes now threatened to become a whiteout. Ellie's voice buzzed over the handheld. "Doc, we've got about 90 minutes before this place disappears into the storm. If you're gonna get him out, it's gotta be soon." Reese clicked her radio. "Understood. Is your bird ready for a tandem pull?" "You're asking me to lift 2 full-grown wild Mustangs on a single pass," Ellie said. "That's a suicide ballet, Reese." "Not a ballet, a rescue." There was a pause. Then, "I'll start prepping." Reese turned to Lucas, who was kneeling by Copper, adjusting the brace. "We stabilize him as much as we can, but if his vitals drop any further, we lose him in transit." Lucas nodded grimly. Midnight's the variable. They both looked at the black stallion. Midnight stood inches from his brother, still as stone. Snow gathered on his shoulders, melting in slow rivulets that trickled down his legs. He hadn't moved since Reese had finished the brace. Except his eyes, those never stopped moving, watching everything, calculating. Lucas exhaled. "We try to pull Copper alone, Midnight's gonna lose it, and I wouldn't blame him." Reese crouched by Midnight's flank. "He's not just attached, he's invested." Midnight glanced at her, but didn't shift. That look again, not wild fear measured protection. "We do this together," Reese said aloud, "or not at all." She reached into the equipment bag and pulled out the custom-made sling harness, a durable, padded rig designed for airlifting injured equines. Normally it was used for one horse. One calm, medicated horse, not 2 stallions with barely a leash between them. Lucas examined the second harness. "We ever even tested this configuration?" "Nope." "Thought so." Ellie's voice cracked over the radio again. 10-minute warning. Storm's ahead of schedule." Reese stood. "Let's make history then." Back up on the ridge, Ellie adjusted her headset and watched the sky roll over itself. Gusts tore across the cliffside, bending the smaller pines sideways. She radioed the hangar. "Ground crew, confirm rigging. We're doing a dual extraction." Static. Then a voice. "Ma'am, are you?" "Confirm the damn rigging." "Aye." Confirmed. Ellie adjusted her harness and tapped the photo of her late horse, Clover, taped to the dash. "We're going in, girl." On the canyon floor, Reese held the harness up for Midnight to see. She didn't move quickly. Every action had to be intentional, like a dance performed for someone who didn't trust the music. "Midnight," she said softly, "you know we need to move him. The storm's coming, and Copper won't survive another night out here. Not like this." She laid the harness on the ground in front of him. "I can't do this without you." Then Midnight did something neither of them expected. He stepped forward, one hoof, then another, and then deliberately he leaned his head down and smelled the harness. Not panicked, not defensive, curious. Lucas held his breath. He's inspecting it. Midnight circled the harness once, touched it again with his muzzle, then turned his head to Copper and nuzzled his cheek, pressing their foreheads together in a gesture so intimate it brought a lump to Reese's throat. Then, incredibly, Midnight walked over and stood beside the gear. Reese swallowed. "He's saying yes." They worked quickly. Lucas helped Reese secure the rig around Copper's midsection. The sedative had taken hold just enough to keep the bay stallion calm, though his breathing was still shallow. Then Reese did the unthinkable. She stepped toward Midnight and slid the second harness over him. Not once did he flinch. Lucas looked on, astonished. That horse understands what's happening. Reese didn't answer. Her throat was too tight. Above them, the whine of rotor blades echoed through the gorge. "Here she comes," Lucas murmured, eyes scanning the sky. The helicopter emerged from the storm line like a dragon, its skids trembling against the wind shear. Snow exploded off the trees as it descended, cables swinging beneath. "Eagle 1 to ground team," Ellie's voice boomed. "Show me those targets. We've got maybe one window. Don't make me come back." Lucas guided the cables in. Reese attached the carabiners to the harnesses with expert precision, checking each knot, each cinch. One final check of Copper's oxygen flow. One final glance at midnight. He was calm, steady. "This is it," Reese whispered. "Stand back," Lucas shouted. The lift initiated. The harnesses tightened, snow whipped upward, and slowly the horses began to rise. For a terrifying moment, the stallion swung wildly in the air, buffeted by the gusts. Midnight twisted his head, but didn't thrash. His legs kicked once, then stilled. And then he turned toward Copper. In the air, in the middle of chaos, Midnight pressed his neck against his brother's side, holding him steady. Lucas gasped. He's bracing him. He's keeping Copper calm. Reese had seen a lot in her life: wild rescues, stampedes, births in the field under fire. But this was sacred. They hovered together. Tangled in wind and trust, two shadows suspended over a canyon of death, and neither one let go. 30 minutes later, at the veterinary landing pad outside the Three Rivers Emergency Clinic, Reese and Lucas sprinted across the ice-slick concrete as Ellie brought the chopper in. The team rushed forward with stretchers, thermal blankets, and medical carts. Copper was lowered first, pale, trembling, sedated. Then Midnight, eyes alert, legs stiff from strain, but otherwise unharmed. Still connected, still watching. Nora Huxley, the facility's chief surgeon, stormed toward them, gloves already on. What the hell kind of cowboy stunt was that? Reese didn't break stride. A stunt that saved them both. Nora stared at Midnight. And why is that one not in a trailer yet? Reese looked her square in the eye. Because if you separate them now, we're not just losing a patient, we're killing a bond. That night, as Copper was wheeled into surgery, Midnight stood in the adjacent enclosure, refusing to lie down, refusing to blink. His head stayed fixed on the operating room doors. And when Copper cried out once under the knife, beneath the bright lights, Midnight answered with a soft, low call that echoed through the sterile walls. It was a sound no one forgot, not the vet techs, not the surgeons, not even Ellie, who lingered at the far end of the barn, helmet in hand, eyes glassy. "What do you think he's saying?" one of the interns asked quietly. Reese, standing at the observation window, answered without looking away. "He's saying, 'I'm still here.'" The wind wasn't letting up. It punched through the air like it had a score to settle, rattling the trees and sending bitter cold through the seams of Ellie Tanner's flight suit as she steadied the chopper. The dashboard lights blinked their warnings, but her eyes were locked on the cable below, on the two horses swinging gently beneath her in tandem. Midnight and Copper, she'd flown soldiers, evac patients, and wildland firefighters out of burning ridges, but never two stallions suspended over a jagged canyon in a snowstorm. Never anything like this. "Easy, girl," she whispered to the controls. She wasn't sure if she was talking to herself or to the helicopter. Through the headset, static cracked as Reese's voice broke in. "Status? We're airborne. Winds are rough. Midnight's stable. He's steadying Copper midair." "Say again?" "He's pressing against him, calming him. It's like he knows." There was a pause, then Reese's voice came quieter. "Don't take your eyes off them." "I wouldn't dream of it," Ellie murmured. Below the belly of the helicopter, the twin stallions swayed gently in the icy gusts. Copper's head drooped, body limp under the sedation, his injured leg braced in fiberglass and foam. But Midnight was something else entirely. His legs were tucked, chest rising slow and rhythmic, but his neck extended across the gap between them. His muzzle brushed Copper's mane, a constant silent whisper. "You're not alone. I'm right here." Inside the emergency veterinary clinic in Three Rivers, the trauma team was racing against the clock. Stretchers had been rolled to the helipad. Dr. Nora Huxley was waiting with her surgical mask hanging around her neck, barking orders like a general before combat. "We're not equipped for this kind of dual intake," one of the interns muttered. "We're not equipped for wild love either," Nora snapped back. "But here it comes." Outside, the snow had turned to sleet, and the helipad lights reflected off the swirling mix like a blizzard of tiny knives. Ellie brought the chopper down in slow, tense degrees. The harnesses touched down first. Then came the crunch of hooves on concrete. As the crew rushed in, Midnight turned his head toward Copper, even as boots thundered around him, even as hands grabbed at straps and leads. He didn't flinch. He just watched. "You first," Reese said to Nora, motioning to Copper. "Right," Nora nodded. "Let's get him inside. Internal bleeding is still possible. We'll need a full body scan before going in." They wheeled Copper toward the surgical wing. But when the doors closed behind him, Midnight moved. He reared slightly, not wild or violent, but decisive. His front hooves slammed the concrete, and his head lowered toward the door, nostrils flaring. "Let him see," Reese said sharply. A technician reached over and popped the small observation panel in the top of the door. Midnight leaned in, looked through it, and calmed instantly. "He needs visual contact," Reese said, more to herself than anyone. Nora glanced at her. "That's not normal." "No," Reese whispered. "It's extraordinary." In the operating room, Copper lay on the table beneath the glow of the surgical lamps. His chest rose and fell steadily. Monitors beeped in rhythm. Dr. Huxley scrubbed in and called out the first incision. "Fracture runs through the cannon bone," she said, examining the X-ray pinned on the wall. "We'll need to reinforce with a titanium rod. We're on the edge of what a Mustang can tolerate. Time is everything." Outside, Midnight paced the length of the hallway between the door and the window. Every time Copper stirred under anesthesia, he would stop and let out a low, rumbling nicker. It wasn't panic, it was presence. "You ever seen anything like this?" asked Ellie, who hadn't left. Reese shook her head. "I've seen herd behavior. I've seen mothers with foals. But this is deliberate." Inside, Copper shifted, a low grunt escaping his muzzle. Midnight answered through the wall with a soft, soothing sound. A sound not of fear, but of promise. The moment passed. Copper stilled. One of the vet techs at the intake desk wiped her eyes. "He's talking him through it." Dr. Huxley didn't look up from her work. "Then we'd better not fail him." 3 hours later, the surgery was done. Titanium pinned and plated the fracture. Internal bleeding had been controlled. Antibiotics and fluids administered. And still through all of it, Midnight waited. They wheeled Copper into a padded recovery stall, lined with hay and lowlights. Midnight followed without a lead. He just walked beside the gurney, muscles tight, eyes flicking from every person who touched his brother. When the stall door was closed behind them, Midnight pressed his head to Copper's neck and let out a single exhale, slow and warm. Only then did he step back and rest, standing quietly beside the cot. And that's when he collapsed. His legs buckled. He hit the ground hard, eyes wide, chest heaving. "Midnight!" Reese dropped to her knees beside him. Dr. Brooke Harrington, who'd arrived mid-surgery, rushed forward. "Get me vitals, now!" Midnight was conscious, but barely. His breathing was shallow. His ribs moved erratically. Brooke examined him quickly, then turned to Reese. "He's severely dehydrated, malnourished. His blood pressure's tanking. He's been holding it together by sheer force of will." "For how long?" Ellie asked quietly. Brooke looked down at the stallion's sunken flanks. "Judging by muscle loss, his coat, and stomach lining, at least 8 to 10 days without proper food or water." Reese's breath caught. "He's been guarding Copper, even before we found them." No one spoke. In the corner stall, Copper stirred. Midnight lifted his head slightly, just enough to see. That was all he needed. Brooke inserted an IV, whispering to the stallion like he could hear her through the exhaustion. "You did good, boy. Now let us take it from here." By morning, the storm had buried most of the roads, trapping vehicles at the edge of 3 rivers and cutting power to half the grid. But inside the emergency clinic, warmth lingered. The brothers were alive. Midnight had stabilized, finally drinking water after Copper regained consciousness. When Reese walked into the recovery stall at dawn, she found them both lying down side by side, their heads tucked toward one another, as if they had never been apart. "You two rewrote the book on wild behavior," she said softly. A young vet tech named Holly stood beside her, eyes wide. "They're not just brothers, are they?" "No," Reese said. "There's something deeper." Holly hesitated. "Should we start paperwork for adoption or transfer?" Reese looked at the stallions. Midnight was awake, blinking slowly. Copper was breathing deeply, a soft sigh escaping as his brother nudged him once, gently. "No," Reese said. "For now, we just let them rest." Outside, the snow continued to fall. But inside that small corner of the world, 2 wild creatures had carved out something powerful in the silence, not survival, but love. The storm didn't break for another 2 days. Outside the 3 Rivers Veterinary Clinic, snow covered everything in a thick, relentless blanket. The fence lines disappeared. Footprints vanished within minutes. The world had gone quiet except inside stall 3, where 2 horses, once half lost to the wilderness, were fighting for a second chance. Copper, the younger bay stallion, lay propped on a bed of hay, his injured hind leg bound in steel and tape and hope. His body had taken the brunt of exposure hypothermia, fracture, deep tissue trauma. But with fluids, heat, and time, he had begun to mend. And Midnight, his older, darker counterpart, stood beside him. Always. He never left the stall. Not to eat, not to rest, not even when the clinic staff coaxed or pleaded. He stood, he watched, he waited, and he guarded. "Dr. Callahan," Nora Huxley said flatly, tapping her clipboard as she stepped into the observation room. "This is insane." Reese was seated on a rolling stool near the stall window, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the 2 brothers. She didn't flinch. "What part?" "The part where you let a wild stallion pace 5 feet from a freshly post-op patient with 0 restraints. It's a lawsuit wrapped in a heartwarming news story." Reese raised an eyebrow. "He hasn't so much as flicked an ear at anyone. And Copper's vitals have improved every hour since Midnight got in that stall. That doesn't make it safe." "It makes it real." Nora exhaled. "You and your gut feelings. You're lucky it hasn't bitten you yet." Reese turned toward her then. "Let me ask you something, Nora. How many times have you seen a horse survive internal infection with minimal stress indicators?" "Hardly ever." "And how many post-op horses hold still without sedation when their pain spikes?" "Even sedated, they fight the brace." Reese nodded toward the window. "And yet Copper hasn't bucked once, not even during therapy. You think that's a fluke?" Nora was quiet. Inside the stall, Midnight moved. He walked slowly, limping slightly still from his own weight loss around Copper's side and gently nudged a pile of hay closer to his brother's mouth. Copper didn't eat much, just enough to humor him. Reese smiled faintly. "He's doing more for that horse than morphine ever could." Later that afternoon, Reese entered the stall alone, clipboard in hand, and approached the brothers with quiet steps. Midnight didn't rear or pin his ears. He simply lifted his head and watched her, calm but guarded. "Hey, fellas," Reese said softly, crouching beside Copper. "Time for our daily check-in." She placed a stethoscope gently to the stallion's chest and listened. Stronger, more rhythmic, still a ways to go, but better than 2 days ago. "You're a stubborn one," she murmured to Copper, "but I've worked with worse." A soft sound answered her. She looked up. Midnight was standing over her, inches from her shoulder. He wasn't breathing hard or acting anxious. He was nickering, low and steady. "You talking to me now?" she asked. Midnight dropped his head a little more and exhaled against Copper's flank. And that's when she realized he wasn't speaking to her. He was soothing his brother. The moment Reese leaned forward to check Copper's sutures, Copper flinched more from reflex than pain, and Midnight instantly pressed his muzzle to the exact spot, as if to anchor him in place. Reese froze. That wasn't instinct. That was something deeper. That was trust. That was family. But not everyone agreed. That evening in the break room, Nora stood with her arms folded, staring at the whiteboard that mapped out Copper's projected recovery timeline. "He's doing well," Brooke Harrington said, sipping from a chipped mug of black coffee. "No signs of infection. Muscle reflexes responding to pressure stim." "And yet," Nora muttered, "we've got a 1,000-pound animal standing guard like a canine support dog." Brooke tilted her head. "You're uncomfortable with it because it doesn't fit protocol?" "I'm uncomfortable with it because if Midnight panics during a nerve flare-up, someone's going to get crushed." Brooke smiled wryly. "Then maybe don't be in the stall when that happens." Nora shot her a look. "I'm kidding," Brooke said. "Sort of." The next day, Reese and the team prepared for a small but essential hurdle getting Copper on his feet. The brace had been adjusted to support limited weight bearing. The therapy pad had been laid down. The doors were secured, monitors and meds were ready. But Copper wasn't moving. He lay there, tense, eyes wide, breathing fast. "Post-traumatic freeze response," Reese said. "He's scared. He doesn't understand we're helping him." Then Midnight stepped forward, without a cue, without instruction. He walked to Copper's head, lowered his own, and gently bit his mane. Not hard, not painful, just enough to catch attention. Then he stepped backward. And again. Bit, step, like a teacher guiding a foal. Reese whispered, "He's showing him what to do." And Copper tried. One leg, then another. Wobbly, weak but willing. The entire staff stood frozen in awe as the younger stallion leaned heavily into the brace and didn't collapse. "Son of a," Nora breathed. "He stood," Reese whispered, "because Midnight told him it was safe." But Midnight's strength was not infinite. That night, just before lights out, Reese checked the camera feed and noticed something alarming. Midnight hadn't moved in hours. She rushed to the stall. His head was down. His breathing was ragged. His body trembled with fatigue. Brooke met her at the door. "We pushed him too far." Reese knelt down. Midnight didn't react. She placed a hand against his side. He was burning up. His dehydration had returned. "He refused to eat again," a vet tech said behind her. "We tried hay, alfalfa pellets, molasses water, nothing." Reese stood. "He won't eat if Copper doesn't." They brought Copper a bowl of warm mash. He sniffed it, nuzzled it, took a single bite, and as if on cue. Midnight finally lifted his head. He watched. He waited. Then he stepped forward and began to eat. Slowly, steadily, side by side with his brother. "God," Brooke whispered, "what are we even witnessing?" Reese didn't answer. She just stared. Because in that moment, she finally understood what had been true all along. Midnight wasn't just protecting Copper. He was living for him. And Copper, broken leg and all, was beginning to live again because Midnight refused to let him give up. Spring came late to the Moonrise Mustang Sanctuary. Even in early May, the wind still carried a bite, and patches of snow clung stubbornly to the north-facing hills. But the valley was thawing bit by bit, just like the hearts of the people who worked there, and the bond between two horses that no one could quite explain. Midnight and Copper had been transferred to Moonrise 3 weeks earlier, when Copper's surgical recovery entered the rehab stage. The clinic in Three Rivers had done all it could. rest, rods, and round-the-clock monitoring, but this next phase required more than medicine. It required space, it required trust, and it required a choice. Dr. Reese Callahan leaned on the split-rail fence at the west paddock, her coffee gone cold in her hand. Her eyes tracked the two stallions across the enclosure. Copper was walking limping, yes, but walking 5 or 6 steps at a time before stopping to breathe. Midnight matched every step like a shadow. Reese felt someone step beside her. She didn't need to look. "Morning, Jaden." Dr. Jaden McAllister, 32, fresh from a wildlife behavior doctorate at UC Davis, nodded as he took off his ball cap and leaned on the fence. He wore a navy hoodie with the Moonrise logo stitched across the chest and a pair of boots too new for the mud they stood in. "They're synced," he said. "I've seen synchronized grooming, synchronized movement in zebra herds. But this?" He whistled under his breath. "It's like watching one body with 2 heads." "They're brothers," Reese replied. Jaden shrugged. "So are hyenas. They don't act like this." Across the paddock, Copper stopped walking and dropped to his knees in the grass. Midnight followed immediately, circling once before settling next to him. He didn't lie all the way down, just kept watch with one eye half closed and one ear trained backward toward the barn. "He doesn't sleep unless Copper does," Reese murmured. "And even then, he only rests half his brain." Jaden chewed the inside of his cheek. "What happens when Copper's strong enough to walk without him?" Reese turned toward him. "That's the question, isn't it?" That afternoon, they met in the rehab barn for a closed-door team discussion. Reese stood at the head of the tack room table, flipping through progress charts and medical logs. Brooke Harrington dialed in via video from the Three Rivers Clinic. Jaden sat across from Nora Huxley, who had begrudgingly driven out from town. "We need to talk about release plans," Reese said. "Copper won't be fit for wild reintegration, ever." Nora nodded. "That leg's forever compromised. He'd never outrun a coyote, let alone another stallion." Brooke's voice came through the screen. "So we keep him here. He can live out his life in the sanctuary paddocks." "Right," Reese said. "The question is, what about Midnight?" The room went quiet. Jaden shifted. "He's healthy, full mobility, no injuries. He'd make it." "Physically," Reese said. "But emotionally?" "He's a horse," Nora cut in. "Not a person." Jaden raised an eyebrow. "With respect, you saw the footage. Midnight didn't just survive a rescue. He participated in it. He made choices, deliberate, protective ones. What he's doing isn't instinct. It's loyalty. Or codependence, or love." Reese let the word hang in the air. And then she spoke. "We let him decide." Nora blinked. "Come again?" "We give him the option," Reese said. "Let him choose between Copper and the herd." "You want to offer a wild Mustang philosophical agency." "No," Reese said. "I want to respect what he's already demonstrated." Brooke leaned toward the camera. "How do we test it?" Reese smiled faintly. "We open the gate." The test was set for the next morning. They waited for the wind to shift, for the herd to move close enough to be seen, and for Copper to be stable after his hydrotherapy session. Jaden handled the logistics. Reese arranged the paddock. The team cleared all non-essential personnel from the area. Just before noon, the gate to the open range was unlatched and left ajar. Midnight noticed it immediately. He stood still, ears up, head tilted. He could smell the wild on the breeze, hear distant hoofbeats in the hills beyond the pines. It was there, the freedom he'd been born into. A life without fences, no halters, no humans, no wounds to care for that weren't his own. He walked slowly to the gate. The staff, watching from the barn, held their breath. He paused in the opening, his black coat rippling in the wind. His nostrils flared, his muscles tensed. Jaden whispered, "This is it." Midnight stepped forward, 1 foot, then another, and then he stopped. He turned his head. Copper was watching him from across the paddock, lying down in the straw with his head raised, ears tilted forward. Not fearful, just waiting. Midnight stared at him for a long, silent moment. Then, with a motion that stunned everyone present, he walked back. Not only that, he reached out with his muzzle and nudged the gate closed. When the latch didn't catch, he nosed it again. Click. Reese whispered, "Did he just—" "He chose," Jaden said. Midnight walked slowly across the paddock, returned to Copper's side, and lay down beside him. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred. That evening, Reese sat on the observation deck above the paddock, journal open in her lap. The setting sun painted the valley in long streaks of gold and rose. She wrote without thinking. Midnight had a choice, and he chose to stay, not because he couldn't survive alone, but because Copper couldn't, and that was enough. Below her, the two stallions dozed in the grass. Copper's head rested across Midnight's back. Reese didn't cry often, but that night she did. Not from sadness, but from the quiet realization that freedom isn't always about running away. Sometimes it's about standing still, right where your heart belongs. 6 months passed. The Moonrise Sanctuary bloomed into summer under Utah's wide blue sky, and with it came a rhythm, the kind that settled deep into the bones of the land, quiet and slow, like the hush of hoofbeats on warm earth. Copper no longer limped. Not entirely, at least. His right hind leg still bore the evidence of trauma, a slight twist in the stride, a stiffness on cooler mornings, but he could walk, trot even, on his better days. The scars along his flank had faded to a shadow beneath his reddish coat, but what mattered most was the spirit behind his eyes. It was alive again, because Midnight had refused to let it die. Every morning, the two stallions were the first to rise, while the rest of the sanctuary horses still dozed under the shade of the cottonwoods. Copper and Midnight were out in the far paddock, strolling its perimeter, nosing through fresh hay, or just standing quietly, flank to flank. Midnight had become something of a legend at moonrise. Visitors whispered about him in the same reverent tone they used for saints or war heroes. "That's the one who wouldn't leave," they'd murmur. "That's the one who chose to stay." But to Copper, he wasn't a myth. He was just his brother. Reese Callahan leaned on the split-rail fence one warm August morning, coffee cup in hand, her boots already caked in dust. Jaden McAllister stood beside her, watching the two horses with his tablet resting loosely at his side. "They're communicating," Jaden said. "Not just body language, vocal cues, pressure points. It's something else entirely." Reese smiled. "Midnight's teaching him how to walk again." "No," Jaden said, eyes wide with something close to wonder. "He's teaching him how to live." Across the field, Copper approached a therapy ramp they'd built into a shallow hill. Step by step, he climbed it, slow, careful, deliberate. When he reached the top, he paused and turned. Midnight was waiting at the bottom. Then Copper descended. Reese's throat tightened. "He hasn't done that since the surgery." "He wouldn't," Jaden murmured, "until Midnight went first this morning." That afternoon, a special visitor arrived. Maggie Ellen James was 9 years old and had spent most of her life in a wheelchair. "Cerebral palsy," her mother explained gently as she pushed the chair across the gravel path toward the barn. She couldn't run or ride or walk without assistance, but Maggie loved horses, loved them with a quiet ferocity that pulsed through her like a second heartbeat. "She doesn't speak much," her mother added, "but she understands everything." Reese knelt in front of the girl. "Maggie, would you like to meet Copper?" The child's eyes lit up like sunrise. They rolled her chair out toward the lower paddock, where Copper stood grazing under a row of aspens. Midnight lifted his head the moment he saw them and stepped forward slowly, placing himself between the girl and his brother. not in aggression, but in instinct. Reese raised a hand. "It's okay, Midnight. She's a friend." The black stallion studied the child. Maggie raised a trembling hand. Midnight didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped forward, bowed his head, and exhaled slow and soft like a breeze across the skin. Then Copper followed. He walked right up to Maggie's chair and lowered his head until his forehead touched her palm. The girl's fingers curled into his forelock, and for the first time that week, her mother saw tears, not of pain or frustration, but something else, joy. Reese wiped at her eyes and turned away. Some things were too sacred to witness fully. Later that week, Jaden ran a full genetic analysis. He hadn't planned to, but there was something gnawing at him, a curiosity he couldn't shake. The behavior between the two horses went beyond typical kinship, beyond herd loyalty. There was something about the way Midnight mirrored Copper's every twitch and flinch, even while he slept. The results came back the next morning. Reese opened the envelope in the barn office while the fans hummed softly above her. She read the papers 3 times before whispering, "No way." Then she called Jaden. He arrived breathless, and she handed him the results. "Not just half-siblings," he said slowly. "They're twins?" "Superfetation twins," Reese said. 2 embryos conceived weeks apart during the same estrus cycle, extremely rare in horses, practically unheard of in the wild, which means they weren't just bonded, they shared the womb, they grew together. And somehow, even after birth, they stayed connected. Jaden ran a hand through his hair. No wonder they wouldn't leave each other. "They never have," Reese said, "not from the moment they formed." Autumn came to moonrise in a swirl of red and gold. Copper could now walk the entire length of the west pasture. Midnight was his constant shadow, but no longer his crutch. Slowly, gently, they were becoming 2 again, still close, still intertwined, but learning to carry their own weight. Visitors came in waves. Scientists, journalists, teachers, parents, veterans. People who needed hope, even if they didn't know it when they arrived. And there, in the middle of it all, were 2 horses that reminded everyone what love looked like. When it didn't ask for anything in return. Love that stayed through the storm. Love that chose presence over escape. Love that closed the gate, not because it had to, but because it wanted to. Reese stood with Maggie and her mother on the final day of their visit. The little girl had drawn a picture 2 horses under a moonlit sky, their heads touching, and she handed it to Reese with shy pride. Midnight approached from the far side of the paddock and stood close enough for Maggie to reach him. He didn't move, didn't blink, just waited. The girl whispered something into his mane. Her mother couldn't hear it, but Reese could have sworn the horse did. That night, as the sun dipped below the ridgeline and the stars emerged one by one, Reese sat in the loft above the barn and wrote in her journal. Some bonds aren't broken by time or distance. Some find their shape before the world even sees them. Midnight didn't choose the wild. He chose his brother. He chose to stay. And somewhere out in the pasture, under a sky full of watching stars, 2 horses stood together. Not because they were trapped, not because they were trained, but because they belonged. To each other, to something bigger than words, to a truth deeper than instinct. And in that quiet, wind-swept field, they kept a legacy alive, one of unconditional love, unshakable loyalty, and a choice that would echo long after hoofprints faded. Because freedom isn't the absence of fences, it's knowing which ones you'd never want to cross. If this story touched your heart even a little, drop a 1 in the comments to let us know you're still here, or just type 0 if it left you speechless. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There's another Mustang story waiting for you just around the bend. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.